Alright, in our last video we built these coasters and we sanded them all to the correct size, and we rough sanded them with 80 grit sandpaper. That just gets us our nice finish look. It gets most of our swirl marks out, and we did that with the random orbital sander. What we got to do now is we got to get it down to 220 grit. So we went from 80 to 150. That gets it pretty smooth. When you go to the 220, you're going to be able to feel the difference between the two pieces. So we'll go ahead and do a quick 220 sanding just to get it really smooth, and remove any of the last of the scratches that we made by building it, and then we'll go ahead and finish them. So you can see when you're sanding down to 220, it doesn't take a whole lot of sanding, because at that point you're really not interested in removing any more material. You've already made the material flat and smooth. You're just basically refining the scratches even smaller. All sandpaper leaves fine scratches. The cool thing about the random orbital sander is it leaves random swirl patterns instead of straight ones. So you're never going to have zero swirl marks. But with these ones, you can't see them with the human eye. So it leaves a nice, smooth finish. Okay. So what we're going to do next in the finishing process is, in order to have a nice, even coat without any discoloration or kind of where the finish soaks in more to one side than the other side, just to give a nice, even look, we want to go with an oil finish first before we seal it off. So I've got a set here that I have already finished with boiled linseed oil. It's nothing fancy. You can get it at any hardware store. This is made by Clean Strip, the same people that make brush cleaner and stuff like that. But I coated this with just a nice, thick, generous coat of linseed oil last night, so it's dried about 12 hours, maybe a little bit more, closer to 16, and it gives a nice smooth finish, and it kind of sets the tone for the top coat so that it goes across evenly and absorbs evenly, and I've found that it gives a much smoother finish. If you put the oil on first, let it cure for at least 16 hours. You can go 24 if you want to be extra safe. But then you're going to put the seal coat on top of that. For the seal coat, we're going to go with shellac. A lot of people call all sealers shellacs. There is only one shellac though, so make sure you get the correct shellac. The cool thing about shellac is it dries really fast, it sands really easily, and it doesn't change the color of your wood much. You can get it in clear. This is made by Zinsser, and it's just a really great finish. You can put on more than one coat. What I do is I usually do 2 coats, and I sand in between coats with 400 grit. It just gives it a nice, glossy, beautiful finish, and you're gonna love it. So what I do is I've got these little just pieces of scrap wood set up here, and what I do is I put a coat of shellac on one side and just set it, let it dry, and then do the other side, set it, let it dry, and then I'll shellac the edges, because when you do the top and the bottom coat, sometimes you have a little bit that hangs off the side and covers that side. So before you do the final sides, you can sand that smooth to make sure you don't have bumps and stuff like that. Again, use your 400 grit, and you can even wet sand it to give it even smoother. I've wet sanded them before, works great. So we're going to put our top coat on, let it dry, then we'll do our bottom coat and go from there. The other nice thing about the shellac is you can use any old paintbrush. This is just a cheap kind of throwaway paintbrush. And it doesn't leave any bristle marks. You put it on, and even though you may see the bristle marks while it's still wet, when it dries clearly, and there's no bristle marks. And also make sure that this is mixed really well. I give it a good shaking before I open it up, and You just don't want to see any separation there. So you don't have to put this on really thick. Just a light coat will do you. But put that light coat on there, and you can see that it plays really well with the oil finish. You don't want to use a poly in this case. I know this because I've tried it and failed. The poly does not play well with the oil finish. It sits on top and it never dries. It'll just sit there and gel. So make sure you're using the right finishes. So we just put a really thin coat on there, and then once that dries we'll do the bottom, and then once we're done in the sides, and once we're done with the entire first coat, we'll come back with some 400 grit sandpaper, give it a little sanding, and then do our final coat of shellac. Alright, we're back for the coat on the back side. Again, we're just going to put on that thin coat. And let it dry. Alright, our edges and our both sides are now dry with the shellac, and I've got 400 grit sandpaper, and it's not long enough to put on the block, so I just wrapped it around the block. There we go. You don't have to do a whole lot, just a little bit of sanding. You're not trying to remove too much, unless you find a bump or something. Like right there, it's kind of built up on that edge, so we'll take that down. And if you see any imperfections or anything, you're going to want to take those down. And you'll feel it when you're done with this 400 grit. It's just going to feel like glass. You're going to like it. Alright, we're all sanded with the 400. We're going to do our second coat, and we'll be just about done. Alright, our second coat is dry. We just got to do the final wet sanding. The wet sanding is not as aggressive as dry sanding, so it's not going to remove as much material, and it'll help us even it out. But we have our gloss coat like we want. We just need to even out our coating, and then we're done. I just put some water in the sink so that the water's not running during the video. So here's your 400 grit sandpaper. You just get your piece wet, get your sandpaper wet, and you'll just barely sand it. You don't have to do much. And just keep some water going on there. I remove any irregularities or any place that it's thicker. Sometimes at the edges it can build up. But most importantly, your two faces, you want to make sure they look pretty good. Alright, and we'll just do that on the rest of them, and we're done.